Welcome back to chapter 5, where we are talking about the nervous system senses. This video, we will start with talking about the sense of sight or vision. Visual receptors are found inside the eye. The accessory organs for the sense of sight include your upper and lower eyelids, your eyelashes, the lacrimal apparatus, and the extrinsic eye muscles. The upper and lower eyelids are called palpebrae. They're there to protect your eyeball and your receptors. Your eyelashes are attached to the palpebrae, to protect your eyes from things falling in it. You have the lacrimal apparatus, that is what produces tears. And then you have the extrinsic eye muscles. These are the muscles that move the eyeball. So, eyelids, palpebrae. The palpebrae composed of 4 layers. You have the skin, the muscle, the connective tissue, and the conjunctiva or conjunctiva. Um, the skin, this is the thinnest skin in the body. So you know that the body has different levels of skin thickness depending on the location of the skin and the function of that part of the eye, with the thickest skin being the soles of your feet, the next thickest being the palms of your hands. Now, the thinnest skin in the body is the skin of the eyelids. You have the muscles associated with the eye. You have the orbicularis oculi, which is the round muscle that surrounds the eye orbit, that is responsible for helping to close the eyelid. You have the levator palpebrae superioris. So levator, elevate, elevate palpebrae, eyelid, superioris at the top. So the levator palpebrae superioris is the muscle that opens the eyelid, whereas the orbicularis oculi closes the eyelid. You have connective tissue, including the tarsal glands, which secrete oil into the eyelashes. Now, I know that tarsal, the word tarsal, is what we use for the ankle bones, but please know that you can use these terms in multiple different places. And in this case, it has nothing to do with the feet or the ankles. So tarsal glands are those that secrete oil onto the eyelashes. So they're like sebaceous glands for your eyelashes. Then you have the conjunctiva, which is the mucous membrane that lines the eyelid and covers portion of the eyeball. So when people would lift their eyelid and you start to see the pink tissue underneath the eyelid, that's the conjunctiva. That is the mucous membrane that lines that eyelid, and then you also have a portion of it that covers the eyeball. So this in this image, this is the eyeball. This would be the upper eyelid. This is the lower eyelid, and this is a closed eyelid so that the eyeball is protected. These would be eyebrows. So you have your eyelashes. The tarsal glands are located just deep to the muscles of the eyelid. Um, yeah, so the tarsal glands are what secretes the oil for the eyelashes. So let's talk about the lacrimal apparatus. The lacrimal apparatus is a part of the system that produces tears that are used to protect the eye. So lacrimal apparatus includes the lacrimal gland, the canaliculi, the lacrimal sac, the nasolacrimal duct, and lysozymes. So the lacrimal glands are located in the orbit. It's lateral to the eye, and it is what secretes tears. So your tears are produced by the lacrimal gland. So this would be an exocrine gland because remember, exocrine glands are those glands that secrete directly to a surface. And in this case, we're talking about secreting tears to the surface of the eye. It is located on the lateral aspect of the eye. So when your eyes water or when you cry, the tears are starting in the lateral aspect of your eye, and then it moves toward the medial aspect of the eye after it's been secreted into the eye. Canaliculi, we already know this term means little canals. So these are two ducts that collect the tears. You have the lacrimal sac that collects the tears from the canaliculi. This lies in the groove of the lacrimal bone. You have the nasolacrimal duct, nasal meaning nose, lacrimal referring to the lacrimal apparatus. Duct, of course, that's a tube. So this is the tube that collects from the lacrimal sac. This empties the tears into the nasal cavity. So when a person cries and they end up having to blow their nose, you may notice that when those times happen and you have to blow your nose, the material coming from the nose is more watery, and that's because those are literally the tears that have just come from your eyes. It emptied out into your nasal cavity. Then you have your lysozyme. Lysozyme are like enzymes that are antibacterial. So you have these lysozymes inside of the tears that are antibacterial, so that if there are any bacteria in or on your eye, they're less likely to have a negative effect because these enzymes are there to protect the eye and hopefully kill the bacteria before they can cause any kind of infection in your eye. So, lacrimal apparatus includes the lacrimal gland that secretes the tears in the lateral aspect of the eye. When the tears are secreted in that lateral aspect, gravity moves it toward the medial aspect of the eye, where you have the canaliculi. These are two ducts that collect the tears. Once those tears are collected, they are moved to the lacrimal sac, which is which sits in a groove inside the lacrimal bone. The lacrimal sac then takes the tears and funnels it to the nasolacrimal duct, which leads the tears into the nasal cavity. And that's why you have to blow your nose when you cry. The tears also contain lysozymes, which are basically enzymes that have antimicrobial or antibacterial properties to help protect the eye from bacteria that may invade. So, lacrimal gland on the lateral aspect of the eye, you see these ducts that are leading the tears into the eye on the lateral side. Once the tears get into the eye, they slide on over toward the medial aspect of the eye where you have the canaliculi, superior and inferior, that collect the tears. They shuffle the tears into the lacrimal sac. That then leads the tears to the nasolacrimal duct, and that leads the tears to the nasal cavity. And again, that is why you need to blow your nose whenever you cry. There are 6 muscles that move the eyeball. Each eyeball has 6 muscles associated with it. These are the 6 extrinsic eye muscles for movement of the eyeball. Yes, you need to know these. Superior rectus. Remember, rectus means straight up and down. So this rotates the eye up and medially. Up and medially. Inferior rectus, down and medially. Medial rectus just moves the eye medially. Lateral rectus moves the eye laterally. Superior oblique rotates the eye down and laterally. Inferior oblique rotates the eye up and laterally. So review those. Know the directions that each muscle moves the eyeball. So here are the 6 eyeball muscles. You have the lateral rectus, so that moves the eye laterally. So if this muscle were to contract, think about this being a whole muscle. They cut it so that you can see parts of it. But if this is the origin and this is the insertion, when this muscle contracts, it's going to pull the eyeball this way so that now the eye is looking laterally. You have the superior rectus that is going to contract to make your eye move, look up, etc. So make sure you're looking at all 6 of the eyeball muscles so that you can understand how each of them move. The structure of the eye itself. The eye is a hollow spherical organ that allows you to see. Sphere is a circle. So the eye is a hollow, round, ball-shaped organ that allows you to see. The wall of the eye has 3 different layers. You have the outer tunic, the middle tunic, and the inner tunic. Tunic is like a shirt or a covering or a coat. So the outer tunic is called the fibrous tunic. Middle tunic is the vascular tunic. Inner tunic is the nervous tunic. So automatically you can see sort of what's happening. The outer layer of the eyeball is going to be more fibrous. Think about it. It's more fibrous because it is closer to the external environment. It needs to be more fibrous to be more protective. So it's thicker, it's more durable because it needs to be more protective because it's protecting the eye from the external environment. In the middle layer, you have more of those vessels. So your blood, your lymph, all of the fluids that need to flow in and out of the eye, nourish the cells of the eye, remove the waste of the eye. That's located in that vascular tunic. Vascular because of the blood vessels. And then the nervous tissue, the neurons, the receptors are on the inner aspect of the eyeball. That's why it's the inner tunic, the nervous tunic. So here you can see your eye has 3 layers. You have the sclera, which is the fibrous tunic. You have the middle, which would be analogous to the vascular tunic. And then you have the inner portion, which is the nervous tunic. All right, so inside of the fibrous tunic, it consists of the cornea and sclera. So the sclera is the white portion of the eye. Going back, when you look at an eyeball, you'll see all of the white of the eyeball. That is called the sclera. That is that fibrous tunic associated with the outside of most of the eyeball. When it comes to the anterior aspect of the eyeball, you don't want that thick white coating there because then you wouldn't be able to see. So instead of it being thick and white, it's thick and translucent so you can see through it. So the cornea is the continuation of the sclera that is still the fibrous tunic, but it is clear to allow light to go in, to, and through the eye so that you can see. The cornea is the anterior 1/6 of the fibrous tunic. It is the transparent window of the eye. So transparent, meaning that light can get through it because it is clear. It helps focus the light rays and it transmits and refracts light from the external environment to the back of the eyeball. The sclera is the posterior 5/6, so the cornea and sclera are continuous with each other. The cornea, again, is transparent to allow light to go through it and help the light be focused. And the sclera is the majority of the outside of the eye, and it is white. It is opaque, meaning you cannot see through it. It is thick where you can't see through the whiteness, and it is tough. It protects the eye. It's where your eyeball muscles attach. And the optic nerve goes through the sclera as well as the blood vessels. It goes through the sclera. The vascular tunic. The vascular tunic is consistent of the choroid coat, the ciliary body, and the iris. So let's go back to the image. You have the choroid coat, which is this middle layer deep to the sclera. It's continuous with the ciliary bodies and the iris. So all of that is a part of that middle vascular layer. So the choroid coat, posterior 5/6 of the eye, it provides the blood supply, which is why it's a vascular tunic, contains melanocytes. The melanin is what absorbs extra light. So remember, melanin is an antioxidant that helps to absorb light. It helps to decrease the amount of oxidative damage caused by free radicals. And in this case, it helps to absorb extra light that is trying to enter into your eye. The ciliary body is the anterior portion of the eye. It is the thickest portion and is pigmented. It forms the rings around the lens. So it's what forms the rings that holds the lens in place. It is also responsible for changing the shape of the lens to help you focus. So the lens of your eye, just like the lens of a camera, is what helps to focus so that when you're looking at something, you can try to see it more clearly. And it's because of these ciliary bodies that that lens can change shape in order to help you focus better. It contains ciliary muscles that move the lens and with the radiating folds. Then you have the iris. The iris is anterior to the ciliary body. It sits in front of the lens. The iris is the pigmented portion of the eye. So when we say that a person has brown eyes, hazel eyes, green eyes, blue eyes, gray eyes, that is the pigmented iris that we're looking at the color of. The iris controls the light entering the eye. So it changes, it changes to allow more or less light into the eye to avoid damage and to allow you to be able to see in the dark. Then you have the anterior portion of the eye, the anterior cavity of the eye. This is the cavity between the cornea and the lens. It's filled with a watery fluid called aqueous humor. Let's go to a image. So you have the cornea here. All right, you have your ciliary muscles there with the ciliary processes there attached to the lens. This is what will contract. So the ciliary muscles will contract, pull on the lens to either flatten it or allow it to be more round to help to focus the images that are coming from the external environment into the eye through the lens. This is what helps to focus that image in the back of the eye and hopefully help it be clear. The cornea also has, you have the iris. So again, that's the color portion of the eye. And this iris is going to get bigger or smaller depending on how much light is present in the space that you're in. If there's more light, the iris gets smaller. So you have very small pupils. You're decreasing the amount of light in the eye. If you have less light, if it's dark, the pupils get bigger, and the pupil is basically just the space created by the iris, the hole in the middle of the iris. So when it's dark, the pupil gets bigger, the iris starts to relax to allow more light to come in so that you can see in the dark. And then anterior to that, you have this anterior chamber of the eye. So the anterior chamber sits in front of the lens and the iris of the eye. Let's go back. So anterior cavity sits between the cornea and the lens, and it's filled with a watery fluid called aqueous humor. Aqueous, please look that word up. You need to know the definition. Aqueous refers to water, something that's watery. Humor, the humor is a fluid in the body. So I know when we look at the word humor, we think humor funny, but in old medicine, they called the fluids of the body the humors of the body. And this one is an aqueous humor. So then you have the lens. The lens is the transparent biconvex structure that lies behind the iris and is elastic. Biconvex. Let's go back to that image that we just saw. So this lens is biconvex, meaning that it curves outward that way and curves outward that way. It has two outward curves, biconvex. It lies behind the iris. So again, the iris is controlling how much light goes through the lens. And the lens is elastic, which is why it can change shapes according to what you're looking at to help you focus. It's held in place by suspensory ligaments of the ciliary body. So going back to the previous image, these would be the suspensory ligaments of the ciliary bodies that holds the lens in place. Suspensory ligaments of the ciliary body. Helps to focus light rays. So the process of accommodation is the ability to change the shape of the lens so that you can look at close objects. If you've ever had an eye exam and the doctor held a finger or a pencil or some other object immediately in front of your face and told you to stare at it and don't change your gaze. And then they moved it closer and closer to you so that it was close to your nose, and then pulled it further and further away. What they were testing was accommodation, seeing if your lens still has the ability to change shapes in order to see objects that are close. The lens will thicken and become more convex when it is looking at a close object. It'll thin and become flatter when you're looking at something further away. This is how it changes shape in order to better help you see things better. So if you're looking from the tip of your nose to a tree in the distance, it will then go from more convex and round to flatter and thinner to help you see it better. The ciliary muscles will then relax the suspensory ligaments during this accommodation in order to help. So this image is showing you accommodation. So you notice that the lens is thicker and rounder here. This is in order to help see something close. And you'll notice that the lens is thinner and flatter here, allowing the person to see something further away. The iris and aqueous humor. The iris controls the amount of light entering the eye. It consists of connective tissue and smooth muscle, which is the color portion of the eye. Again, this allows you to say, I have brown eyes, I have blue eyes, I have hazel eyes, I have gray eyes, etc. That is the color portion of the iris. The pupil is the hole in the middle of the iris that the light goes through. Dim light stimulates radial muscles and the pupil dilates. So When there's very little light, the pupil wants to get bigger, so the iris relaxes so that the pupil can get bigger or dilate to allow more light to come in so that you can, once your eyes adjust, you can see in the dark. And then when the light gets brighter, it stimulates the circular muscles to contract to close the pupil so that you're letting less light in so that you don't get damage from so much bright light hitting the back of your eye. The amount and distribution of melanin determines your eye color. Aqueous humor, remember that is the fluid in the front or anterior chamber of the eye or anterior cavity of the eye, sits anterior to the lens and the iris. The aqueous humor fills both the anterior and posterior chambers of the anterior cavity. So the anterior cavity, this cavity in front of the lens has two chambers, an anterior and a posterior chamber. And this aqueous humor circulates through the pupil to go to both the anterior and posterior chamber. The aqueous humor is secreted by epithelial tissue on the inner surface of the ciliary body. So if we go back, so ciliary body, so these tissues here, the anterior aspect of it is what produces the aqueous fluid. So you see here it talks about the posterior chamber. So that is this portion of, remember I said the anterior cavity is the cavity that sits anterior to the lens. You have a posterior chamber and an anterior chamber of the anterior cavity. The anterior chamber is in front of the iris or anterior to the iris. Posterior chamber is posterior to the iris. The aqueous humor provides nutrients and maintains the shape of the anterior portion of the eye, and it leaves the cavity through sclerovenous sinus. So in order for this fluid to drain and to recirculate, to get filtered and clean, to get new nutrients, it leaves the anterior cavity through the sclerovenous sinus. So, sclerovenous sinus, you'll see that the fluid is produced and it'll secrete, it'll fill the anterior and posterior chambers and eventually go into this sclerovenous sinus in order to be recirculated. The sclerovenous sinus is also called the canal of Schlemm. Canal of Schlemm. Is that everything? Yes. All right. Then you have the posterior cavity. The posterior cavity is the space enclosed by the lens, ciliary body, and retina. Lens, ciliary body, and retina. This contains the vitreous humor. So the anterior chamber, anterior cavity had the aqueous humor. The posterior cavity has the vitreous humor. Vitreous humor is a thick gel. So the aqueous humor is watery. Aqueous means watery. The vitreous humor is a thicker one. So thick gel that holds the retina flat against the choroid coat helps maintain the shape of the eyeball itself. So the vitreous body is vitreous body plus the fibrin, collagen fibers. So posterior chamber is posterior to the lens, and this is where your vitreous humor is located. And if we go back even more to another image, I'm looking for the image of the whole eye. Here it is. Okay, so your anterior cavity has aqueous humor. Posterior cavity, all of this has vitreous humor, and this is the gel-like fluid that holds the retina in place, so holds the back part of the eye in place and helps give the eyeball shape. So then you have the nervous tunic. The nervous tunic. This is the inner layer of the three layers of the eyeball. It contains the retina with your visual receptors. So those photoreceptors that are going to help you see and pull in the information that you're visualizing with those receptors, send that to the brain to be interpreted as sight. The inner tunic is continuous with the optic nerve in the back of the eye. It ends just behind the margin of the ciliary body in the front of the eye. In the retina, you have these structures, the macula lutea, which is a yellowish spot in the retina. The fovea centralis is the center of the macula lutea. This is the area that produces the sharpest vision. So if you ever try to see something and you are looking at it and turning your head to different angles so that you can see it the best, so that you can see the best image of it, that's because you are unknowingly um, trying to focus that image on the fovea centralis, because the fovea centralis is in the center of the macula lutea, and that produces the sharpest vision. Then you have the optic disc. The optic disc is actually a blind spot. This blind spot has no photoreceptors, and it is found where the nerve fibers from the retina leave the eye to become the optic nerve. So in your retina, you have all your photoreceptors except in the place where you don't, the blind spot. So in the optic disc, there are no photoreceptors because all of the nerves leading from the receptor in the rest of the retina is collecting to form the optic nerve. So, composed of several discs, several layers. You have the innermost layer. These are the photoreceptor cells. You have horizontal cells, bipolar cells, uh, amacrine cells, and ganglion cells. You have the photoreceptor cells, which are bipolar. And you have the photoreceptor cells, the bipolar cells, and the ganglion cells that provide a pathway for your impulses that are triggered by the photoreceptors to reach the optic nerve. So, photoreceptor cells, bipolar cells, and ganglion cells basically make a way for the impulses from the stimulus received by the photoreceptors, gives it a way to reach the optic nerve so that it can go to the brain for interpretation. Then you have horizontal cells and amacrine cells that modify and integrate your impulses. So that is the inner tunic. Inner tunic is consistent of the retina, and these are the parts of the retina. So when you look at the back of the eye, looking at the back of the eye. So when a doctor looks in your eye, this is what they're seeing. This is the retina. This is the retina. You have this space here that is the macula lutea. And then in the center of that, that little dot is the fovea centralis, where you have the sharpest vision. And then here is the optic disc, where you have no photoreceptors. And the reason why you have no photoreceptors is basically this is a hole in the retina where your blood vessels and your optic nerve are coming into and leaving out of the eye. So in the drawing, you can see it here. The retina, the whole thing is the retina. You have the macula lutea, and the center of it is the fovea centralis. And then close to that, you have the optic disc, which allows you to see, I'm sorry, which which is, it has no photoreceptors because it is basically just a space where your blood vessels and your nerves enter and leave the eyeball. So when you look at the eye closer, you have the sclera that is most superficial. Then deep to that is the choroid coat. And then you have the retina. All right, so then you have the retina. You have the retina, the pigment epithelium, the the receptors, the photoreceptors. The photoreceptors are rods and cones. Then you have your horizontal cells, bipolar neurons, amacrine cells, ganglion cells, etc., that are your neurons that connect the photoreceptor to the nerve fibers. Then once that information is transmitted um, to the nerve fibers, it can go to the optic nerve and um, be interpreted by the brain. So then, so light refraction and lenses. Let's talk about lenses. So convex lenses, concave lenses. Convex lenses are similar to the cornea and the lens of the eye. So these are lenses that move out, and this caused the light waves to converge. So let's say you have light coming from multiple different sources, which you do. Once those lights hit a convex surface, all of that light, all of that image comes and meets at one point. That is what converge means. Make sure you look up the word converge so that you can know for yourself. And then a concave lens is one that is not poking out, it's pushing in. So it is a curve that goes inward. So when a light wave hits it, instead of all of the light coming together, because of the shape, the light rays actually disperse and diverge. So convex lens, concave lens. A lens, let's see, when a surface between different refractive media is curved, it forms a lens. So that is what a lens is a surface between different refractive media that is curved. So light going through a flat surface will typically change direction, and that is the refraction. Changes, di re changes direction where it hits the surface and then continues on. That is what refraction is. So converging light, light coming in from multiple different sources, go through a convex surface. So the convex surface comes out, and all of that image will then converge into one spot in the eye. A concave surface, so one that goes inward, when the light hits it, all the light rays diffract or diverge, so they scatter. Convex surfaces help the light converge. Concave surfaces help the light diverge. All right. So, refraction disorders. When people have trouble seeing, it can be because of one of these refraction disorders. So, we have farsightedness, nearsightedness, um, and astigmatism. Two types of farsightedness. We have farsightedness caused by aging, that is presbyopia. Make sure you're looking up the medical term presby, Presby, and then opia. Know what that term means. Presbyopia begins after age 45. So this is farsightedness caused by aging. Accommodation becomes impossible. So your eye is having a harder and harder time to be able to see images that are closer. It's having a hard time changing the lens shape to a more thick, rounded structure in order to focus on something close. And this is due to the loss of elasticity of the lens of the eye. And when someone has presbyopia, they need reading glasses that can help refract the light in such a way that they can then see objects that are close. Nearsightedness is called myopia. Myopia. This is when the eyeball is too long, so the light is focusing in front of the retina instead of on the retina itself, and that creates a blurry image for distant objects. So things that are farther away, the image for those things will focus before it gets to the retina, making that image blurry. So a person cannot see far things. They can only see things that are near, and that is corrected by concave lenses. Farsightedness that is not due to aging is caused because the eyeball is too short, so the light ends up focusing behind the retina. That also creates a blurry image for close objects, and that is corrected by a convex lens. And then an astigmatism is where the eyeball is shaped differently. Either the eyeball or the cornea or lens are shaped differently so that some parts of the image are in focus while other parts are not. And then the person that has astigmatism can get corrective glasses in order to be able to see. So astigmatism, farsightedness, nearsightedness, also called myopia, and farsightedness caused by aging, which is presbyopia. So when the eye is too long, the light goes in and that image focuses before the retina, and so that becomes blurry. With an eye that is too short, the light comes in and the image focuses behind the eye, which also causes the image to be blurry. In a normally shaped eye, the image should come in and focus directly on the retina to produce the clearest image. And in somebody um, who had a long eye, myopia, you have a concave lens that will help focus the image on the retina. And then for someone who is hyperopic or has too short of an eye, they can use a convex lens to focus the image on the retina instead of behind the eye. So now we have our photoreceptors. Photoreceptors are rods and cones. So the photoreceptors are modified neurons of the retina that sense light and allow you to see in light and in dark. Rods are long, thin projections, rod-shaped. They contain the pigment rhodopsin. These are hundreds of times more sensitive to lights than cones. They provide vision in dim light. Um, and provide vision without color. So you'll see shades of gray. It produces outlines of objects. So rods are what allow you to see in the dark. This is why when you look in the dark, you can't really see color, but you can see shapes. You can see black and white. You can see shades of gray. So it's hundreds of times more sensitive to light than cones because if it's dark, you want the most sensitive photoreceptor to be able to pull the light or to be able to see the little bit of light that is occurring in the dark. So rods are for black and white or dark. Cones are for color. Cones are for color. So the cones are short, blunt projections or cone-shaped projections. These contain the light-sensitive pigments um, erythrolabe, chlorolabe, and cyanolabe. I hope that's how it's spelled. Erythrochlorocyano. Erythro means red. Think erythrocyte, red blood cells. Chloro means green, chlorophyll. Cyano is blue. I can't think of anything to give you that means cyano, but cyano means blue. So cones allow for color, and the pigments that are allowing for that are the erythrolate, chlorolate, and cyanolate. Provides vision in bright lights, produces sharp images as opposed to just the outlines of objects. It produces color vision because these light pigments see different colors. And the fovea centralis contains only cones. So remember the image. Let's go back. The image of the eyeball. Where is it? So fovea centralis here in the center of the macula lutea. So here, when you look at the macula lutea, this is the highest concentration of rods and cones. And in the fovea centralis, you can see best there with the sharpest image because it's only cones, only those receptors that are receiving images and information from light, bright light, and color. Fovea centralis contains only cones. So, rod-shaped photoreceptors, cone-shaped photoreceptors, cones color, rods black and white. So an actual image, these will be your cones, these will be your rods. So erythrolate, red light, chlorolate, green light, cyanolate, blue light, rhodopsin. So rhodopsin is in the rod. So rhodopsin for rods. This is what allows you to see those shades of color, shades of gray, I should say, black and white and darkness. And then the iodopsins are these three different pigments, light sensitive pigments associated with the cones, allowing you to see color. Stereoscopic vision. Stereoscopic vision provides perception of distance, depth, height, and width of objects. It is possible because of the distance between the pupils. So in humans, we have eyeballs that are set a certain distance apart. Of course, everybody's is different depending on the size of their head and where their eyes sit in their head. But because the eyeballs are not close together, we have two eyeballs and they have some distance apart. Focusing both eyeballs on the same image allows us to be able to perceive distance, depth, height, and width of objects. So when you look at something in the distance, you can see about how tall it is, about how far it is because of the distance between the pupils. It results from the formation of two slightly different retinal images from the eyes. So your left eye and your right eye, even though they're looking at the same thing, because they are not in the same location, they're seeing slightly different objects or slightly different fields of vision. That's why if you are opening both eyes, you take your hand and cover one eye, you'll see slightly different image than if you go ahead and cover the other eye. The overlapping images from the two eyes combine in the visual cortex to form a single 3D image of the object. So we can see things in 3D because our eyeballs are separated, and those two images, the visual fields of both eyes, are taken in and translated in the visual cortex as one 3D image. Lifespan changes. So we have age-related hearing loss due to the damage of the hair cells in the spiral organ, the degeneration of neural pathways to the brain, and tinnitus. Tinnitus or tinnitus, I've also heard it's pronounced. Tinnitus is that ringing in the ears, and all three of those can lead to age-related hearing loss. You have age-related visual problems due to things like dry eyes, floaters. So those floaters are little tiny crystals floating around the vitreous humor in the posterior cavity of the eye. Visual problems can occur because of the loss of elasticity of the lens or the decreasing, well, that leads to the decreasing in accommodation of the lens. So the decrease of ability of the lens to change shape to be able to see things that are closer because it lost elasticity. You can have glaucoma. Glaucoma is um, a condition where the aqueous humor is not able to drain out of the anterior cavity of the eye. So remember, you had the organs of Schlemm. That was where the aqueous humor drained out of the anterior portion of the eye. And I said earlier that that fluid drains out so that it can be filtered and cleaned, it can be renourished, and then it can go back into the eye to do it again, but it has to leave the eye in order to be refreshed, and new aqueous um, humor can be deposited into the eye. If that doesn't happen, the person gets glaucoma. There's an increase in pressure created by the increase in fluid that damages the structure of the eye, and that can cause blindness. Cataracts is oxidative damage to the cornea that causes the cornea to become cloudy. Think about it like frying an egg. So the whites of the egg, when you first crack an egg open, the egg white is actually not white, it's more clear. It becomes white once it gets cooked. So think about the cooking process as the oxidation process. And the cornea of the eye, once it's oxidized, goes from clear to white because of that oxidation, just like egg white goes from clear to white because of the cooking. Then you have macular degeneration, so breaking down of the macula, breaking down of the retina. That can cause age-related visual problems. And then there's age-related smell and taste problems due to loss of the olfactory receptors. So olfactory receptors get damaged or die um, just due to age, I guess, age or damage. So loss of smell or loss of olfactory receptor is called anosmia. Anosmia. A without nosmia, smell. All right, make sure you look the word up. And that is the end of chapter 5. I'm sorry, chapter 12. That is the end of chapter 12.